Imagine hearing a soft knock at your door late at night. You hesitate, but curiosity drives you to peek outside. Two children stand on your porch, their heads bowed. They ask to come in, their voices eerily calm. But when they look up, you freeze, because where there should be eyes, there's only darkness. You know you should turn away, shut the door, but something compels you to listen. What would you do if pure evil wore the face of innocence? Chapter 1. The First Sightings. Unveiling the Black-Eyed Phenomenon. It all began on a quiet night in 1996 when Brian Bethel, a journalist in Abilene, Texas, had an encounter that would later become the cornerstone of one of the most unsettling urban legends of the 21st century. As Brian sat in his car outside a movie theater, quietly filling out a check to pay his internet bill, he noticed two young boys approaching his vehicle. The area was dimly lit, casting long shadows, but there was nothing immediately alarming about the boys until they came closer. Brian's initial description of the children seemed ordinary. They appeared to be around 9 to 12 years old, dressed in hooded pullovers. The boys exhibited an unusual calmness and an air of quiet confidence, far beyond what one would expect from kids their age. Yet, despite their appearance, something felt deeply wrong. The pit of Brian's stomach twisted with an inexplicable fear that he struggled to rationalize. As they reached his car, one of the boys tapped on the window, and Brian rolled it down just slightly, enough to speak but not enough to let them in. The boy who tapped on the window spoke first. His voice was smooth and emotionless, but his tone carried an odd urgency. He explained that he and his friend wanted to see a movie, but they had left their money at home and needed a ride to fetch it. Brian's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. The theater they claimed to want to see had already started, and giving a ride to two unknown children seemed out of the question. As he hesitated, he noticed something deeply disturbing. The boy's eyes were completely black. There were no whites, no iris, just pure, inky darkness, like staring into an abyss. The realization hit Brian like a punch to the gut. He struggled to maintain his composure as the boy continued to speak, insisting that they needed a ride and growing more demanding by the second. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over him, coupled with an instinctive urge to flee. Somehow, he knew that if he let them into his car, something terrible would happen. He wasn't just scared, he felt an almost primal terror, like a prey animal cornered by a predator. Summoning his courage, Brian quickly made an excuse and shifted his car into reverse. The boys' pleas turned sinister, their voices cold and menacing as they pressed against the window, demanding to be let in. But Brian didn't stop to listen. He drove away as fast as he could, his heart pounding in his chest. When he finally glanced back in his rearview mirror, the boys were gone. They had vanished, as if swallowed by the night. This encounter, which Brian later documented in a blog post, would be the first widely recognized report of the black-eyed children phenomenon. His account set the stage for what would become a global legend, spawning hundreds of similar stories from people all over the world. Many of these reports shared eerie similarities. Children appearing at doors, in parking lots, or on lonely roads, asking for entry into homes or vehicles. And always, their eyes, pitch black and devoid of life, were a telltale sign that these were no ordinary children. The characteristics of black-eyed children have remained consistent across various reports. They are usually described as having pale skin, sometimes with a slightly bluish or grayish hue. Their clothing is often outdated or inappropriate for the weather, and they speak with an odd formality that's out of place for their apparent age. Witnesses frequently note an overwhelming sense of fear or anxiety that accompanies the encounters, as if the very presence of these children disrupts the normalcy of reality. The black-eyed children are persistent but never violent, always asking for permission to enter, whether it's into a home, a car, or simply to make a phone call. Another early encounter that solidified the legend occurred in 2000, when a woman from rural Vermont recounted her chilling experience. Late one night, she was awoken by a loud knock at the door. Groggily, she peered through the peephole and saw two children standing on her porch, a boy and a girl, both with their heads bowed. They looked almost frozen, as if standing in the cold for hours. Concerned, she opened the door slightly, asking if they were lost. The boy lifted his head, revealing his pitch-black eyes, and asked, "May we come in?" The woman felt a wave of nausea and fear so intense it was nearly paralyzing. She stammered out a no, and the boy's face twisted into a scowl, his voice lowering to a growl as he repeated, "We need to come in. Let us in." The woman slammed the door and backed away, trembling. For hours afterward, she felt watched, as if unseen eyes were peering through her windows. When she finally dared to look outside, the children were gone, leaving no footprints in the fresh snow. These early sightings set the framework for the legend, and soon, stories of black-eyed children encounters began to flood the internet. From Reddit threads to YouTube channels dedicated to paranormal phenomena, the accounts all carried the same sense of unease. Witnesses would describe the same pattern: a sudden, inexplicable appearance of one or two children, always seeking permission to enter, their presence accompanied by a feeling of intense dread. Skeptics have argued that the black-eyed children phenomenon could be the result of overactive imaginations, sleep paralysis, or mass hysteria fueled by the internet. Others suggest it's a case of mistaken identity, with children wearing dark contact lenses or suffering from medical conditions that affect their eye pigmentation. Yet, none of these explanations can fully account for the visceral fear described in each encounter, nor the persistence of the legend in various cultures. Regardless of one's belief in the supernatural, there is no denying the impact of the black-eyed children on those who have encountered them. These stories, rooted in real-life experiences and shared with an unwavering sincerity, have cemented the black-eyed children as one of the most chilling urban legends of our time. And while the origin of these dark-eyed entities remains a mystery, their presence continues to haunt the fringes of our collective consciousness. Always appearing when least expected, their inky eyes peering into the souls of those unfortunate enough to cross their path. Chapter 2: A Global Epidemic. Encounters Across the World. When Brian Bethel first shared his chilling encounter with black-eyed children in Texas back in 1996, little did he know that it would spark a wave of similarly terrifying reports across the globe. What was once thought to be a localized phenomenon quickly spread like wildfire, with people from different countries and cultures coming forward with their own unnerving stories. It became clear that these black-eyed entities were not confined to a single area or region. They were popping up everywhere, in quiet suburban neighborhoods, remote rural villages, and even bustling city centers. Let's start in the United Kingdom, where black-eyed children encounters have been reported with increasing frequency since the early 2000s. One of the most prominent cases came from Cannock Chase, a woodland area in Staffordshire known for its eerie atmosphere and history of paranormal activity. In 2014, a local paranormal investigator, Lee Brickley, received an anonymous message from a woman who claimed to have seen a young girl with jet-black eyes in the forest. The woman recounted how she heard a child's faint cries and, thinking it might be a lost child, followed the sound deeper into the woods. When she finally spotted the girl, she was stunned. The girl looked ordinary enough at first glance, but her eyes were pitch black, with no trace of white or iris. The woman felt a wave of sheer terror and turned to run, only to hear the girl's voice pleading, "Help me, please." She didn't stop running until she reached her car. Curious about this encounter, Brickley dug deeper and found that similar sightings dated back decades in the Cannock Chase area. In 1982, a young couple reported seeing a black-eyed girl wandering aimlessly through the same forest. Despite her desperate cries for help, the couple kept their distance, feeling an inexplicable fear that something wasn't right. It wasn't until years later that they came across stories of black-eyed children and realized what they might have encountered. Moving across the Atlantic, reports from the United States vary in location but share a common thread: an overwhelming sense of dread and unnatural behavior from these children. One such case took place in 2012 in Oregon, where a man reported seeing two black-eyed children on his rural property. It was late at night, and he was relaxing in his living room when he heard a soft knock at the door. Peering through the peephole, he saw two young boys, their heads bowed low. They were soaking wet, despite it being a dry evening, and they asked, almost in unison, if they could come inside to use the phone. The man felt a sudden wave of panic and didn't answer. Instead, he remained frozen, watching as the boy's head slowly lifted to reveal eyes that were completely black. His instinct screamed at him to keep the door shut, and as if sensing his resolve, the boys started banging on the door with increasing intensity. They kept repeating, "Let us in. We need to use the phone." The man stumbled back, grabbed his shotgun, and shouted for them to leave. When he glanced back through the peephole, the boys were gone, as if they had vanished into thin air. Shaken, he searched the property but found no trace of them, not a single footprint in the soft earth surrounding his home. Black-eyed children encounters are not limited to English-speaking countries. In Japan, there are reports of encounters with children possessing eerily similar characteristics. In one documented case from 2009, a woman in Tokyo was approached by a young boy while waiting for a bus late at night. The boy, dressed in what appeared to be a school uniform, politely asked her for a ride home. As she looked down to respond, she noticed that his eyes were entirely black. The woman felt an overwhelming sense of nausea and stumbled away, backing off from the boy. As she turned to leave, she heard the boy whisper, "Don't you want to help me?" The woman ran to the nearest taxi stand and later described feeling as if she had narrowly escaped a grave danger. Interestingly, the phenomenon has also made its way into Middle Eastern countries, where cultural beliefs about jinn, supernatural beings that can shapeshift and take human form, may influence how black-eyed children are perceived. In a 2015 case from Kuwait, a shopkeeper reported seeing a group of children outside his store after closing hours. He initially thought they were just mischievous kids, but as he approached them to tell them to leave, he noticed that their eyes were entirely black. The children stared at him silently, their expressions blank, and then they turned and walked away in perfect unison. The man, deeply unsettled, told his family about the incident, and they suggested that the children might have been jinn in disguise, a belief that added another layer of fear to the encounter. These cases demonstrate that the black-eyed children phenomenon is not just an American or British legend. It's a worldwide epidemic. The locations of these encounters vary widely, from the dense forests of England to the bustling streets of Tokyo, and even to the arid deserts of the Middle East. But no matter where these children appear, the core elements remain strikingly similar. An initial feeling of curiosity or concern that quickly turns into sheer terror, and the instinctual knowledge that whatever these children are, they're not quite human. There are patterns in the circumstances of these encounters as well. Black-eyed children often appear at night or during twilight hours, when visibility is low and people are more likely to let their guard down. They tend to show up in isolated areas, suburban homes far from the city, lonely country roads, or sparsely populated rural regions. Yet, there are also reports of black-eyed children appearing in crowded urban settings, as if to prove that nowhere is truly safe from their unsettling presence. While most witnesses describe these children as merely asking to come in, there have been a few rare cases where the black-eyed children have been aggressive. One man in France claimed that when he refused to let a pair of black-eyed boys into his car, they began pounding on the windows and shouting in a language he couldn't understand. He drove off, only to see them reappear on the road ahead of him minutes later, as if they had teleported. He never spoke of the incident again until he heard similar stories online years later. These accounts, drawn from different cultures and continents, suggest that black-eyed children are more than just a local myth or psychological phenomenon. Their presence transcends cultural and geographic boundaries, adding weight to the fear and fascination they evoke. As their legend continues to spread, one thing remains clear. Black-eyed children have become a true global nightmare, an epidemic of fear that knows no borders or boundaries. Chapter 3. What are they? Theories and explanations. When it comes to black-eyed children, one thing is clear. They stir an unsettling sense of fear that defies explanation. But what are they really? Are they manifestations of something supernatural? Or is there a more grounded explanation for why so many people claim to have encountered these eerie, black-eyed beings? To get closer to the truth, let's break down the main theories, paranormal, psychological, and rational, that attempt to explain this chilling phenomenon. Paranormal theories: demons, aliens, and interdimensional beings. For many, The overwhelming dread and strange behaviors associated with black-eyed children suggest that these entities are not of this world. Some researchers and witnesses believe that black-eyed children are demonic in nature. Theories along these lines often cite religious or folkloric concepts where black eyes symbolize evil, deception, or possession. After all, eyes are often referred to as windows to the soul, and the complete absence of anything human in these children's eyes could indicate a lack of a soul altogether. They might not be children at all, but demonic entities taking on the form of innocence to gain access to people's homes, cars, and even lives. There are documented cases where witnesses describe their encounters as deeply unsettling and spiritually disturbing. For example, in 2016, a woman in Arkansas reported seeing a black-eyed child outside her home just after sunset. She claimed that she felt a sudden drop in temperature and an overwhelming feeling of dread, as if she were in the presence of something malevolent. This led her to believe that the child was not a child at all, but a demonic entity disguised in a harmless form. Many similar reports include descriptions of a suffocating atmosphere and the sense that something profoundly evil was present, leading believers to suggest that these entities are demons attempting to invade people's lives through deception. Another popular paranormal theory is that black-eyed children are extraterrestrials. This idea stems from the children's otherworldly appearance and their strange, monotone speech patterns, which some claim are reminiscent of reported alien encounters. UFO researchers have pointed out that the pale skin, emotionless demeanor, and unusual eyes of black-eyed children bear a resemblance to descriptions of the Greys, a type of extraterrestrial being often reported in UFO sightings. Some who subscribe to this theory believe that black-eyed children are hybrid beings, part human, part alien, created through experimentation or genetic manipulation. They argue that the black eyes are a marker of this hybridity and that the black-eyed children's odd behavior is due to their struggle to understand or mimic human emotions. Yet another theory suggests that black-eyed children might be interdimensional beings, entities that come from a parallel universe or alternate reality. This theory gained traction after several witnesses described seeing black-eyed children disappear suddenly, without a trace, as if they had slipped through a tear in reality. There have even been reports where people claimed that after encountering black-eyed children, they experienced temporal anomalies, such as lost time or distorted memories. Proponents of the interdimensional theory argue that these children appear human but are governed by different physical laws, which could explain why they need explicit permission to enter homes or cars. They might be constrained by rules that don't apply to our reality. Psychological theories: mass hysteria, sleep paralysis, and projection. Despite the eerie nature of black-eyed children encounters, some researchers believe that the phenomenon is rooted more in psychology than in the supernatural. One theory is that these sightings are a form of mass hysteria, where fear and anxiety spread through communities or online forums, leading people to believe they have seen something that isn't there. The power of suggestion is strong, and the human brain has a tendency to fill in gaps when confronted with fear or uncertainty. This theory suggests that stories of black-eyed children are akin to the satanic panic of the 1980s, where widespread fear led to false reports and overblown claims. Another explanation is that many black-eyed children sightings occur during sleep paralysis, a condition where an individual is temporarily unable to move or speak while falling asleep or waking up. During sleep paralysis, people often report seeing shadowy figures or feeling a sinister presence in the room. Some researchers believe that black-eyed children could be a manifestation of this phenomenon, with the black eyes being a detail projected by the subconscious mind. There are documented cases where witnesses claim to have seen black-eyed children during the night, only to realize later that they couldn't move or speak during the encounter, classic symptoms of sleep paralysis. A third psychological theory revolves around the idea of projection. When people encounter something that frightens or confuses them, they may unconsciously project their fears onto it, altering their perception of reality. For instance, children dressed in black or with dark-colored eyes could be misinterpreted as having entirely black eyes if the observer is already primed to expect something sinister. There have been documented cases where, upon closer inspection, witnesses realized that the children they saw were not black-eyed at all. Instead, shadows, lighting, or even dark contact lenses had contributed to the initial terrifying impression. Rational explanations, misinterpretations, hoaxes, and urban legend embellishments. For those who prefer a more rational perspective, the black-eyed children phenomenon can be explained by a combination of misinterpretations, hoaxes, and the evolution of urban legends. Many encounters take place at night or in low-light conditions, where it's easy for details to become distorted. For instance, a child's eyes might appear completely black if they are in deep shadow, if they have dilated pupils due to excitement or fear, or if they are wearing dark sunglasses or contacts. Hoaxes are another likely explanation. There are numerous documented instances of people dressing up as black-eyed children to scare others or create viral content. In 2014, a group of teenagers in England admitted to wearing black contact lenses and pretending to be black-eyed children to frighten people in a local park. With the rise of platforms like YouTube and TikTok, pranksters and thrill-seekers have found it easier than ever to perpetuate the black-eyed children legend through staged encounters and fabricated stories. Finally, the black-eyed children phenomenon might simply be a modern urban legend that has evolved and spread through the internet. Much like Slender Man or the Mothman, black-eyed children are often reported in a formulaic manner. A mysterious knock, a polite request, and a sudden realization of something terrifyingly wrong. This structure makes the stories easy to replicate and embellish, which fuels the spread of the legend. While there are undoubtedly genuine encounters that defy easy explanation, many researchers believe that the majority of the black-eyed children stories are influenced by prior reports and online narratives rather than being independent, factual events. In the end, whether black-eyed children are demons, aliens, interdimensional beings, or simply a figment of our collective imagination, one thing remains certain: they continue to terrify and intrigue us, pushing the boundaries of what we consider possible and leaving us wondering, what are they really? Chapter 4. Myth or Reality? Investigating the evidence. When it comes to the unsettling phenomenon of black-eyed children, separating fact from fiction is no easy task. For decades, accounts of these unnerving entities have emerged from around the world, with witnesses claiming to have encountered them in both isolated rural areas and bustling city centers. But are black-eyed children real? Or is it all just a disturbing urban legend fueled by the internet and overactive imaginations? To get closer to an answer, let's delve into the various pieces of evidence that have surfaced over the years: photos, videos, and audio recordings, while critically analyzing their credibility. Photographs. Proof or manipulation. Over the years, several alleged photographs of black-eyed children have surfaced on the internet, typically showing young children with large, dark eyes staring blankly at the camera. One of the most well-known images circulated widely in paranormal circles is a grainy photograph that appears to show a young girl, about 10 years old, standing on a front porch. Her face is washed out by the camera's flash, but her eyes are entirely black, giving her a menacing appearance. The photo, shared on various paranormal websites and forums like Reddit's No Sleep, has been cited as proof of black-eyed children encounters. However, a deeper analysis raises several red flags. For one, the image quality is low, making it difficult to determine whether the black eyes are real or simply the result of photographic manipulation. Experts who have examined the photo note that the lighting and contrast could easily be altered using basic editing software to create the illusion of black eyes. Furthermore, the child's expression is neutral, not matching the typically unsettling demeanor described by witnesses. Skeptics argue that with the advent of photo editing technology, it's easy for anyone to fabricate such images, and that there's no verifiable source or context for this particular photograph. Another purported image comes from a security camera recording at a gas station in rural Ohio. The footage, which appeared on YouTube in 2017, shows a child standing alone at night, facing the camera. Upon zooming in, viewers can see what appear to be dark, featureless eyes staring straight into the lens. While eerie, the footage is far from conclusive. Experts have pointed out that pixelation and motion blur can create visual distortions, especially in low-light conditions. A forensic analysis of the footage suggested that the child's eyes might simply be deep shadows caused by poor lighting. The lack of corroborating witness testimony and the absence of additional angles make it difficult to confirm whether this is genuine evidence or just a trick of the camera. Videos and audio recordings. Chilling encounters or clever hoaxes. In addition to photographs, a few chilling videos have emerged online, purporting to show encounters with black-eyed children. One of the most infamous videos was uploaded by a paranormal investigator in 2014, showing what he claims is a black-eyed child standing outside his house. In the footage, the investigator pans his camera towards a dark figure at the edge of his yard. The figure, which appears to be a young girl, suddenly looks up, revealing completely black eyes before disappearing into the darkness. While the video is undeniably creepy, it lacks context and clarity. Paranormal enthusiasts have praised it as compelling evidence, but critics argue that the footage could easily be staged. The girl's black eyes, they suggest, could be the result of wearing black Scariest contact lenses, which cover the entire visible portion of the eye. These lenses, often used in movies and special effects, are widely available and relatively inexpensive, making them a common tool for pranksters or those looking to create convincing paranormal videos. The video's authenticity has never been verified, and without additional corroboration or a second source, it remains inconclusive. Audio recordings also form part of the so-called evidence. In a well-known case from 2015, a man from Oregon claimed to have recorded the voices of black-eyed children outside his home. In the recording, faint, childlike voices can be heard whispering, "Let us in. We need to come in." The man, clearly terrified, explains in the recording that he had been hearing these voices outside his window for several nights in a row. While the audio certainly sends a shiver down the spine, skeptics point out that it's easy to manipulate sound recordings or even fabricate them entirely. Moreover, the recording's origin cannot be verified, and the man has remained anonymous, which further undermines its credibility. Online forums. Fact, fiction, or fabrication. The internet has played a significant role in spreading the legend of black-eyed children, with forums like Reddit, 4chan, and dedicated paranormal websites acting as breeding grounds for stories and alleged encounters. On one hand, these platforms have allowed people from all over the world to share their experiences and find others who have seen similar entities. On the other hand, they have also enabled the rapid dissemination of hoaxes and fabrications. One of the earliest documented online forums discussing black-eyed children was the now-defunct ghost.org, where users began posting their encounters in the late 1990s. Many of these stories were eerily consistent, describing children with large, black eyes, pale skin, and a monotone speech pattern. As the stories spread, so did embellishments and variations, leading some to believe that the phenomenon was nothing more than an evolving urban legend. Investigative efforts by paranormal researchers have uncovered numerous cases of copycat stories, posts that appear to mimic earlier reports, often with added sensational details designed to garner more attention or upvotes. Interestingly, a 2012 study by sociologist Christopher French explored how urban legends, like black-eyed children, evolve and spread in the digital age. His findings suggested that while some black-eyed children stories could be based on genuine encounters, many were likely influenced by prior narratives. French concluded that the lack of verifiable evidence and the tendency for stories to be shaped by the expectations of the audience made it difficult to treat online accounts as credible documentation. Paranormal investigations. Debunking or validating. Despite the skepticism, several paranormal investigators have taken up the challenge of validating black-eyed children encounters. Organizations like the British-based Paranormal Investigations Group and the American Society for the Study of Unexplained Phenomena have documented numerous interviews with alleged witnesses, hoping to find commonalities that could lend credence to the phenomenon. However, their findings have been mixed at best. While many witnesses were adamant that their experiences were real, most lacked physical evidence to support their claims. Investigators noted that fear and anxiety often clouded the details, making it difficult to discern fact from fiction. In one case, a renowned paranormal researcher, David Weatherly, conducted an in-depth investigation into black-eyed children after encountering a flood of reports in the early 2000s. His findings, published in his book Black-Eyed Children, suggest that while many encounters are anecdotal, there is a consistent pattern of fear and unease that accompanies these sightings. Still, Weatherly admits that without concrete evidence, such as clear, verifiable photographs or recordings, it is impossible to definitively prove that black-eyed children exist. Despite the numerous photos, videos, and audio recordings that have surfaced over the years, there is no irrefutable evidence that black-eyed children are real. Most evidence is marred by issues of authenticity, poor quality, or lack of context. The internet's role in spreading the legend has further complicated efforts to separate truth from fiction. Nevertheless, the sheer number of encounters and the fear they evoke cannot be easily dismissed. Whether black-eyed children are a true phenomenon or simply an elaborate myth, one thing is certain: they continue to haunt our collective imagination, lingering at the edge of our reality, just out of reach, but never fully gone. Chapter 5: The Darkest Encounters. Unexplained and Dangerous Close Calls. While most encounters with black-eyed children end with a chilling sense of unease and a narrow escape, some cases take a darker turn. There are reports of people who allowed these strange children into their homes or vehicles, only to experience bizarre phenomena, sudden illnesses, or psychological disturbances soon after. These are the stories that elevate black-eyed children from being mere urban legends to something more sinister, something potentially dangerous. Let's explore some of the most harrowing documented cases that suggest black-eyed children might be more than just a creepy myth. The Disappearing Family of Vermont. In 2015, a well-known case emerged from Vermont that has since become one of the most unsettling black-eyed children stories to date. The case involved a middle-aged couple, Jim and Susan, who lived in a secluded farmhouse on the outskirts of a small town. One stormy night, just as the couple was preparing for bed, they heard a soft knock at the door. Jim went to answer, expecting to find a stranded traveler or a neighbor in need. Instead, he was met by two young children, a boy and a girl, both no older than 12. They were dressed strangely in outdated clothing and stood shivering on the porch despite it being relatively warm inside the house. The children didn't look up but spoke in soft, monotone voices, asking if they could come in and use the phone. Against his better judgment, Jim invited them inside. As soon as the children crossed the threshold, Susan, who had been watching from the kitchen, felt an intense wave of dread wash over her. She described feeling as if something dark and malicious had entered their home. Ignoring her gut instinct, she offered the children something to drink. And that's when she noticed their eyes completely black, with no whites, no iris, just solid blackness. Panicking, Susan told Jim they needed to leave immediately. But before they could react, the children began to smile, a slow, unnatural grin that spread across their faces. The lights in the house started flickering, and a high-pitched ringing sound filled the room. Susan later described feeling paralyzed, unable to move or speak. The next thing she remembered, the children were gone. The front door was wide open, and a cold breeze was blowing through the house. The aftermath of this encounter was even more disturbing. Over the next few days, both Jim and Susan fell violently ill. They suffered from severe headaches, dizziness, and nausea that doctors couldn't explain. They experienced nosebleeds and persistent nightmares in which they saw the black-eyed children standing at the foot of their bed, watching them silently. Within a few weeks, the couple had lost so much weight and sleep that they decided to move out of the farmhouse. Shortly after they left, the house mysteriously burned to the ground. Local authorities never found the cause of the fire, and Jim and Susan have since refused to speak about the incident, leaving many questions unanswered. The truck driver's ordeal. In another disturbing case from 2017, a long-haul truck driver named Dave reported a terrifying encounter with black-eyed children at a rest stop in Nevada. Dave had pulled over late at night to catch some sleep when he heard knocking on the driver's side window. He looked out and saw two kids, a boy and a girl, both appearing to be around 10 years old. They were dressed in tattered clothes, and despite the freezing desert night, they showed no signs of discomfort. The children asked Dave if they could get a ride to the next town. He hesitated, sensing something was off. As he looked closer, he noticed their eyes, completely black, reflecting no light. Fear shot through him, and he instinctively locked the doors and started the engine. That's when the children's demeanor changed. They began pounding on the windows, their voices rising in pitch and intensity. "Let us in. You have to let us in," they screamed, their voices unnaturally loud, as if amplified by some unseen force. Panicked, Dave floored the gas pedal and drove off. He watched in his rearview mirror as the children chased his truck, running at an inhuman speed before vanishing into the darkness. Shaken but determined to get as far away as possible, Dave didn't stop until he reached the next town. But his troubles didn't end there. In the days following the encounter, Dave started experiencing strange electrical problems with his truck. His radio would turn on and off by itself, and his headlights would flicker uncontrollably. Mechanics couldn't find any faults, and the truck systems appeared normal during inspections. Dave's health also began to deteriorate. He developed migraines, insomnia, and a persistent cough. He later quit his job, convinced that his encounter with the black-eyed children had cursed him. Poltergeist activity and other paranormal phenomena. In some cases, black-eyed children encounters seem to coincide with poltergeist activity or other unexplained disturbances. A documented case from 2013 in a small town in Missouri involves a woman named Marcy who let two black-eyed children into her home during a winter storm. Marcy initially thought they were neighborhood kids seeking shelter from the cold. She made them hot chocolate and tried to engage them in conversation, but they only stared at her in silence. Within minutes of their arrival, strange things started happening. The lights in her house flickered, objects began to move on their own, and she heard a constant tapping sound that seemed to come from within the walls. The children remained still, their black eyes watching her every move. Suddenly, both children stood up simultaneously and walked to the door without a word. As soon as they stepped outside, the disturbances stopped. Marcy felt an overwhelming sense of relief, but also a strange emptiness, as if the children had drained the energy from her home. Over the next few weeks, she experienced minor poltergeist activity. Objects would disappear and reappear in odd places, and she would hear faint voices whispering her name at night. Paranormal investigators who later visited her home recorded unusual electromagnetic readings, but couldn't offer an explanation. Marcy eventually moved out, convinced that letting the black-eyed children in had unleashed something malevolent into her life. Unexplained illnesses and fatalities. There are even a few cases where encounters with black-eyed children have allegedly been linked to sudden and unexplained fatalities. One chilling report comes from a retired military officer in Montana, who in 2018 claimed that his neighbor, a robust, healthy man in his 50s, fell mysteriously ill and died shortly after encountering black-eyed children at his doorstep. The neighbor had mentioned hearing knocking late at night and opening the door to find two children asking to use the phone. Within days, he developed a severe respiratory illness that doctors could not diagnose. He passed away 2 weeks later, and his family reported strange noises and shadowy figures around their home in the days leading up to his death. Chapter 6. Living with the Legend. The impact on those who've encountered black-eyed children. For those who claim to have encountered black-eyed children, life is never quite the same afterward. What starts as a creepy, unexpected meeting often spirals into a haunting memory that disrupts mental peace, relationships, and even health. Unlike a fleeting ghost sighting or a UFO encounter, these strange interactions seem to leave a lingering darkness that infiltrates the minds and lives of witnesses. While skeptics may dismiss these stories as fabricated or overblown, those who've experienced them firsthand struggle with ongoing fear, paranoia, and in many cases profound isolation. Firsthand narratives. When fear takes root. One of the most detailed firsthand accounts comes from a woman named Jane, a mother of 2 from Maine. In 2014, she shared her experience on a local radio show dedicated to unexplained phenomena. Jane described how, one snowy evening, she heard a faint knock at the door. Assuming it was one of her children's friends, she opened the door to find 2 young boys standing on the porch. They were both looking down, their hoods pulled up against the cold, and they asked if they could come in to warm up. As Jane glanced down at them, she felt an overwhelming wave of dread, as if her body was warning her of an imminent threat. When the boys looked up, revealing their entirely black eyes, she froze. Jane slammed the door shut and ran to check on her children, who were asleep in their rooms. For weeks afterward, she couldn't shake the fear that the boys would return. She became obsessed with researching black-eyed children and stumbled upon online forums where others shared similar experiences. But instead of finding comfort in these shared stories, Jane found herself descending into paranoia. She started to see shadows lurking outside her house at night and developed a severe anxiety disorder that led to her quitting her job. The emotional toll was so great that Jane eventually sought professional therapy. Her therapist suggested that the experience might have been a form of sleep paralysis, but Jane insists that she was wide awake and fully aware during the encounter. Psychological and emotional fallout. Jane's story is far from unique. Many others who have reported encounters with black-eyed children describe a lingering psychological impact that goes beyond ordinary fear. Dr. Robert Schneider, a psychologist who specializes in trauma and anxiety disorders, has encountered several patients who have reported seeing black-eyed children. While he remains skeptical of the phenomenon's existence, he acknowledges that these experiences are real for those who have them. In a 2017 interview with a paranormal journal, Dr. Schneider explained, "What I've noticed in these patients is a consistent pattern of post-traumatic stress symptoms, nightmares, hypervigilance, and avoidance behavior. It's as if they've experienced something traumatic that their minds can't fully process or rationalize." He goes on to describe how patients often become socially withdrawn and have difficulty discussing their experiences with friends or family, fearing ridicule or disbelief. One of his patients, a young man named Peter from Texas, became obsessed with the idea that the black-eyed children were watching him. Peter had seen two such children at a gas station late one night. Afterward, he developed intense paranoia, believing that they were following him wherever he went. He covered the windows in his apartment and installed multiple locks on his doors. When Peter tried to explain his behavior to his friends, they dismissed him as being overly anxious or paranoid, which only deepened his sense of isolation. For many witnesses, the feeling of not being believed can be just as damaging as the encounter itself. Forums like Reddit's No Sleep or private Facebook groups dedicated to black-eyed children sightings have become a refuge for these individuals, allowing them to share their stories without judgment. However, these same platforms can sometimes amplify fears, as members reinforce each other's beliefs in the supernatural, making it harder for individuals to break free from the psychological grip of their experiences. The stigma of a paranormal encounter. Living with the aftermath of a black-eyed children encounter is often complicated by the stigma associated with believing in or talking about the paranormal. The stigma can lead to a kind of self-imposed exile, where witnesses avoid discussing their experiences altogether. In 2019, a British woman named Laura shared her story in a local newspaper but chose to remain anonymous, citing fears of being ostracized by her community. Laura had seen a black-eyed child outside her home in Bristol one foggy morning. The child didn't speak or move, but stared at her with those empty, black eyes for what felt like an eternity. Laura's husband and family brushed off her story as a trick of the light or an overactive imagination. Feeling dismissed and mocked, she stopped talking about it. But the sight of the child's eyes haunted her dreams. Laura's mental health deteriorated over the following months, leading to bouts of depression and insomnia. When she finally decided to share her experience online, she was bombarded with messages of support, but also faced a wave of ridicule and accusations of lying or seeking attention. Despite the challenges, a growing number of support groups and online forums provide a sense of community for those who have had these unsettling encounters. Groups like Black-Eyed Children Encounter Support on Facebook and various subreddits dedicated to the phenomenon allow people to discuss their experiences in a safe space. Many members talk about how they were afraid they were losing their minds until they found others with similar stories. For many, encountering black-eyed children is not something that can simply be forgotten or rationalized away. Whether these children are real entities or simply the product of our minds playing tricks on us, they leave an indelible mark on those who see them. The psychological impact, ranging from mild anxiety to full-blown PTSD, affects how witnesses interact with the world around them. Some become withdrawn, others obsessed, and many live in constant fear that the children will return. Chapter 7. Why They Haunt Us. The symbolism and meaning behind black-eyed children. There's something deeply unsettling about black-eyed children that goes beyond the typical paranormal scare. Unlike ghosts or monsters, which are easily compartmentalized into known categories, black-eyed children blur the line between the familiar and the unknown. They present as innocent children, symbols of vulnerability and purity. Yet their inky, featureless eyes evoke dread, suggesting something far more sinister lurks beneath their youthful appearance. But why do these eerie entities resonate so powerfully with us? What is it about black-eyed children that makes them such a compelling and terrifying legend? To understand, we need to delve into the psychological, symbolic, and cultural layers of what these black-eyed beings might represent. The symbolism of black eyes in folklore and mythology. Eyes are often referred to as windows to the soul, a phrase that underscores their role in conveying emotions, intentions, and identity. When we look into someone's eyes, we instinctively seek a sense of connection or understanding. But with black-eyed children, this expectation is subverted. Their eyes are not just black, but completely devoid of any recognizable feature. There is no iris, no pupil, no hint of humanity, just an empty, dark void that reflects nothing back. This lack of normal eye structure can be deeply disconcerting because it suggests a lack of soul or consciousness, making black-eyed children appear as something other than human. In folklore and mythology, black eyes have long been associated with evil, deception, and otherworldly forces. Ancient texts from various cultures describe beings with black eyes as harbingers of doom or trickster spirits that lure people into dangerous situations. For example, in some Native American myths, black-eyed figures are linked to shape-shifting spirits or malevolent beings that disguise themselves to deceive the living. Similarly, in European folklore, black eyes are sometimes attributed to witches or demons who take on human form to mislead or possess their victims. This symbolic association with evil and deception may explain why encounters with black-eyed children invoke such a primal fear. They tap into deep-seated cultural narratives that associate black eyes with malevolence. Black-eyed children as embodiments of fear, the uncanny and the unknown. Another layer of symbolism tied to black-eyed children is their representation of the uncanny. The concept of the uncanny, first defined by psychologist Sigmund Freud, describes something that is both familiar and strange at the same time, creating a sense of discomfort or fear. Black-eyed children perfectly embody this concept. They look like children, act like children, and speak like children, but something is profoundly wrong with them. Their black eyes disrupt the normal human appearance, creating a jarring contrast that triggers our fear response. This discomfort with the uncanny can be linked to our inherent fear of the unknown. Human beings are wired to detect threats, and we often rely on visual cues to gauge safety. When those cues are disrupted, as in the case of black-eyed children, we're left with an overwhelming sense of unease. Psychologically, the black eyes signal a break from what's normal and expected, throwing us into a state of uncertainty and fear. We know something is not right, but we can't quite articulate what it is. A perfect recipe for horror. The malevolent innocence. Children as symbols of purity turn dark. Children are universally seen as symbols of innocence, purity, and hope. They represent new beginnings, potential, and the continuation of society. When something that appears childlike turns malevolent, it strikes a particularly jarring chord. The juxtaposition of innocence and evil in black-eyed children is what makes them so terrifying. They subvert our expectations and twist something pure into something horrifying. Psychologist Carl Jung referred to this kind of phenomenon as the shadow self, where dark aspects of our psyche are projected onto something external. In the case of black-eyed children, They may represent our subconscious fears about the loss of innocence or the potential for darkness within ourselves and others. They become an externalization of our anxieties about what lies beneath the surface, masked by a facade of innocence. Modern fascination with disturbing phenomena, a reflection of societal anxieties. The popularity of black-eyed children in modern folklore can also be seen as a reflection of our collective fascination with the bizarre and disturbing. In an age where we are constantly bombarded with information, desensitization to ordinary horror has led to a craving for stories that push the boundaries of what's possible. Black-eyed children, with their unsettling appearance and eerie behavior, provide the kind of psychological horror that lingers long after the initial scare. Additionally, the legend of black-eyed children has gained traction at a time when society is grappling with a growing sense of unease and uncertainty. Economic instability, political upheaval, and environmental crises have all contributed to a pervasive sense of anxiety. In this context, black-eyed children may serve as symbols of the chaos and malevolence lurking just below the surface of our seemingly normal lives. They are harbingers of a reality where appearances can no longer be trusted and where evil can manifest in the most unexpected forms. In the end, whether we believe in their literal existence or not, black-eyed children continue to haunt our collective consciousness. They remind us that some things can't be neatly categorized or explained, and that true horror often lies in the gray areas between reality and imagination. By confronting the unsettling nature of black-eyed children, we confront the darkest corners of our own minds, the fears that defy logic, the anxieties that can't be rationalized away, and the unsettling possibility that the world is stranger than we'd like to believe.